It's your boy. We're just gonna give us a few minutes here, just working on getting Nick into the stream, and then we'll get going. How about now? Sound a little bit better? Perfect. I just gotta get you on here, and then we should be fine. Sadly, we can't hear you. Um, that should be fine. Gonna add you on here. Do you want to give me a little something like a hello, or let's get you on here as well. There we go.
How about now?
Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yep, all is well.
Awesome.
All
Good
right,
to see
Nick.
you, man.
Yeah, good to see you too. It's been a while.
Yeah, absolutely.
You guys have been busy.
Yeah, to say the
To
least.
say the
That's
least,
for
for sure.
sure.
Thank you for making the time to chat with me.
Oh, my pleasure.
Obviously, there's no shortage of need for getting some messaging out there, some letting the public know about what's going on, what you guys are dealing with. Seems as though things have just been getting a bit more busy since I left, so it's good that
Y-
it's good that you guys are holding down the fort. But by the sounds of it, things are not going too great, right?
Yeah, I mean it's certainly busy. I think we have the issue of the feeling downstaffed every day, partnered with offload delays increasing and the nursing and the
Mm-hmm.
hospitals being downstaffed as well. That's just kind of the perfect storm for calls taking longer on average and
For sure.
less ambulances being available to the public.
Yeah. So, well, before we get officially going, just for the people that don't know you, just give a little introduction of yourself, like your name, your position in the service. I know, I mean, we know that there's multiple different levels of paramedics, like what level of paramedic you are, and then your position in the union, and how long you've been a paramedic for.
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Nick Desclouds, and I've been a paramedic since 2015. So I've worked exclusively in the province of Ontario. I did all of my schooling in Ottawa, and I worked up in northwestern Ontario for about 3 years as a primary care paramedic. And with that, I have my IV certification. So I worked up in the indigenous communities. I worked up in Kenora, which, for those that don't know, it's close to Winnipeg, so right near Manitoba, about 2 hours away. Got some great experience up there. You get to learn to work without resources and no help's coming. It's just you and your partner in the
Yeah,
sticks, and you're just solving problems as they come.
just making it work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in 2018, I took a job in Waterloo region. Never been to the region before. I heard good things about it, so migrated down to Southern Ontario. Started working here, and I've been here, yeah, since May of 2018. And since then, I've become full-time primary care paramedic with IV certification. And then I've just started over the past year and a half or so as a, a executive member of the union. So I started as a steward for about a year, and then I moved right up into the presidential role, and I've been doing that since March of this year, and I'm on
Yep.
a 2-year term. We vote in our executive teams and our stewards. So far, so good. I mean, there's work to be done every day, and so anytime I'm not on the road working full time, I'm trying to take care of my members and trying to make it a better workplace for everyone.
I can only imagine how much work you got to do on a daily basis, man.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's
So
all it's all good stuff. Yeah.
yeah, oh for sure, for sure. I mean, I've been telling people like they're like, oh, what do you do? Like, oh, I was a paramedic in Canada. Right now, I'm just taking it easy a little bit. But I was like, honestly, paramedicine is probably like obviously it's my favorite job. Like, I wouldn't go into it if you wouldn't go into it if you think it's something else. But honestly, it's so good. I'm glad you guys are out there doing your thing. Kudos to you guys for sure, and kudos to you for being a part of the, not even just a part of the union, but taking up that presidential role. Obviously, that takes a lot of your extra time to do that as well. And I'm assuming like you have a passion for it as well. So kudos to you for that. Um, my plan for just this interview is we're going to go through. I sent you a little document at the beginning, but it'll be a few different sections. We're going to start off with just letting people know, like some people who are watching might not be paramedics. They might be interested in paramedicine or just don't really know what it is. Like I had, oh, you're an ambulance driver. I'm like, well, there's slightly more to it than being an ambulance driver, and I'm
Yeah.
sure you can attest to that. Obviously, that is like when they see us on the road driving to and from, that's what they see, right? But there is more to it than that. So we're gonna start off like right off the hop here. So if someone doesn't know what a paramedic is, in your best words, how would you describe the job of a paramedic is?
Yeah, sure. So basically, a paramedic is someone that provides medical assistance outside of a hospital or a healthcare facility. So our goal is basically whenever there's a situation where someone needs to call 911 and requires medical assistance, we're the people that go to whether it's their home, could be at a shopping mall, could be on the street for a car accident. It's really the location is never uh, determined. So we're just finding out through our dispatch centers where we're going. We respond to these people, and then we provide care right on scene as well as en route to the hospital. And basically, our care starts as soon as we make patient contact, and it ends when we transfer our care over to the nursing staff at the hospital.
Okay, yeah. So obviously, it's your workplace is different, it's very from day to day. But ultimately, all of our uh, who was it that said it? One of our coworkers was like, our office space is the ambulance, but
Yeah.
it's a mobile office space, and we can go wherever we're needed, right?
Yeah.
So what is our role then within like the emergency services? Obviously, so people will know we have firefighters, we have police, and we have us as paramedics as well. But sometimes we all respond to the same incident, right? So when all three of us are there, for those of us that don't know, who's in charge? Is there one person in charge? Are paramedics in charge? Are police in charge? Fire? What can you say to that?
Yeah, so I would say it's dynamic in a lot of circumstances. It really depends on the scene. But just to make the conversation easy, we'll use like a car accident, for example, as
Hmm.
to set the scene. So anytime we respond to a collision, say on the highway, uh, our priority as paramedics is to assist the patient. And our job is to make sure that we can safely get the patient out of whatever situation they're in, get them into our ambulance, perform the care we need to. Sometimes we have to do it right on scene before getting them into the ambulance, and then we transport them to the hospital.
Hmm.
Firefighters have the role of assisting the paramedics, but they also have a role in extricating people out of these difficult situations. So their roles in Canada are a little bit different in the US. The US kind of has a fire medic style, whereas Ontario has paramedics and then they have firefighters.
Hmm.
So the tools that firefighters have usually deal with like extrication. So they have the jaws of life. They have different hand tools that can get people out of vehicles or difficult situations. And then we have the police officers. So the police officers are also trained in first aid, just like the firefighters, and they can assist if the paramedics need help with the patient. But their job in like a car accident, for example, is to kind of control the scene, make sure that the scene is possible. Make sure if you're on a highway, police and fire will help kind of rerouting traffic and making sure that it's a safe working environment for all the emergency services.
Hmm.
And then police also have that after work as well, which is like, how did the accident happen? Who's at fault? What kind of charges are we dealing with?
Yeah.
They are the ones that kind of investigate the scene.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of this scenario, so car accidents, paramedics are only in charge of the patient. They have no responsibility in terms of like the car or the traffic going on outside of that. That's correct.
Yeah, for the
Yeah.
most part, yeah, because we just want to know how is the patient doing, and we will look at a vehicle and we'll look at a scene and we'll use that information to kind of gauge what kind of severity of uh, damage are we dealing with to the
Hmm.
patient. Like, do we
Hmm.
need to take them to a trauma center? Are they okay to have a longer conversation on scene and just deal with them there and then make a decision on whether you go to the hospital or not? So it really, using what you see on scene is a valuable resource for how you're going to deal with the patient.
Which is amazing. And as we both know, but some people might not know, different paramedics are able to do different things for the patient, and so they have different scope of practice depending on their level of training. Correct. So, would you just be able to give us a little bit of the major differences between the scopes of practice between the different levels of care?
Sure, yeah. So we have on the land, we generally have primary care paramedics and then advanced care paramedics. There's very few services that have critical care, but I'll just stick with primary care and advanced care for now.
Yep, for sure.
So primary care is a 2-year school program, and basically it gives you a scope of practice, and you work under a physician's license, basically to perform delegated medical acts. So this would include giving IM injections. If you're IV certified as a primary care paramedic, you can start an IV. You can give fluids. We can give medications like such as Gravol through intravenous. We can give Toradol, and then we have some of the oral medications like aspirin, Tylenol, Advil, those kinds of things.
Hmm.
When you move into the advanced care scope, that's when your scope gradually increases. So that's an extra year of school, and that's going to include uh, pacing people. So if they're in some sort of arrhythmia where their heart isn't beating the way it should, they can put some big pads on the patient's chest and they can kind of do these small shocks. It's called pacing the person, putting them back in a perfusible rhythm. They can do intubations, which I'm sure people have seen on TV. It's where they stick the big tube down your throat, and it's very intense looking.
Yeah.
um, but it allows you to establish, we call it an advanced airway, and then we can attach a big bag onto the intubation, and it allows us to ventilate the patient to keep that oxygen flowing through their body. So those are kind of the big differences. ACPs also have a bunch of extra drugs that are for cardiac patients. They have drugs if they feel they need to sedate a patient, if someone is in a delirious state or they're in active seizure, they have these extra medications that can kind of bring them back to a level where we can kind of deal with the patient.
Hmm.
Um, and then, if you want, I can talk a bit about critical care as well.
It's part of the job. So give it just a short little bit of what
Yeah,
critical
so
care is.
critical, I'll keep it short because I don't know if I can speak too much about what their scope of practice is,
Yeah.
but that's their they usually work exclusively in the air, so they work in helicopters and on fixed wings, and they're a valuable resource to all land paramedic services across Ontario
Yeah.
and across Canada, really. But critical care is known in Ontario as this huge scope of practice. They're in charge of going to very kind of volatile scenes that require lots of extra care, or we need a faster route to a high level hospital, a level one traumatic center, or any sort of level one center.
Hmm.
So they can attach patients to ventilators. They can do a wide array of things that advanced care and primary care cannot do, and they also have the ability to transport patients from an ICU to another ICU
Yeah.
because their level of care is much higher, and they can provide the same style of drugs that you would see in an intensive care unit in Ontario.
Yeah, and I was trying to explain this to someone earlier on, and I was like, imagine, if this was the army, the critical care paramedics, they're the special forces. If they're coming in,
Yeah.
they are the masters of all trades. They'll get the job done, and so I'm pretty sure you definitely touched on that. They are the top of the top in terms of the paramedic ladder, and so on a day-to-day basis, you are in Waterloo Region, correct? You work in Waterloo Region, and so you were talking about primary care and advanced care paramedics. So obviously, advanced care has more higher care, higher level of care. How many advanced care paramedics does Waterloo Region have?
Off the top of my head, I think we run around, I would say 50-ish. So
Mm-hmm.
it's about 20% of our full-time staff
Mm-hmm.
are advanced care paramedics, and usually the primary care paramedics, when they want to up their skills, they'll go to school. So for example, in 2023, I believe we have about 10 paramedics that are going to be taking that year of school to become advanced care paramedics. So the number always fluctuates a little bit, but usually we stay in kind of that 20% range.
And does every service like have advanced care paramedics available to them, or is it different special
It's
services?
different. It's different across other services. So some services have try to stay to a one to one ratio. So there'll be like a 50% advanced care, 50% primary care, and then that allows them to have one advanced care medic in every ambulance, which is an awesome standard to have in any municipality. Um, some services are just primary care with IV certification. So where I used to work up in the north, uh, the volume of calls didn't really dictate the need for an advanced care service. So the municipalities have to kind of gauge the cost benefit of having a advanced care paramedic because they do have a higher wage.
Mm-hmm.
There is a larger scope of practice. There's more training involved. So they have to kind of take those into consideration.
For sure. And so, as we both know, or as most people know, when you see paramedics in the truck, there's two of them. There's two paramedics. And so, in Waterloo Region and in all of Ontario, I'm pretty sure all of the people you see in the ambulance or driving the ambulance in front are both paramedics. Is that correct? They're both paramedics. There's
That's
no
correct.
ambulance driver and a paramedic. They're both paramedics.
Yeah, that's
And
correct.
and so how would that work on a day-to-day basis? Is one person in charge of the patients and the other person is in charge of driving? I've heard that a bunch of times. How does that dynamic work between the two partners?
Generally, you just do, we call it call for call. So basically, you alternate who drives and who attends to the patient. So for any given call, The attendant is in charge of asking the patient questions, being in the back of the ambulance with the patient, giving the report to the hospital staff. When you're driving the ambulance, generally when you show up on the scene with your partner, you're in charge of obtaining the vitals, hooking the patient up to the cardiac monitor, getting the required equipment set up to move the patient from wherever they are into the ambulance, whether that's a stretcher, a stair chair, a backboard, whatever it may be.
Hmm.
You're kind of in charge of the logistics. And then once the patient's loaded into the ambulance, the attendant hops in the back, the driver goes up to the front and then drives to the hospital.
Nice. And so for you, being an on-the-road medic, working full time, what does a day-to-day look like? Like a typical day. I know there's no typical day, but what would a day look like for you as a medic? But also like in the service, what does a day look like in the service Waterloo region?
Yeah, sure. So we have two large headquarters. We call them fleet centers, and that's basically where we start and finish our shifts. Some services across Ontario have just like one station in a township, and you would drive to that township to start your shift. We're unique where we have these headquarters, and these headquarters are massive facilities that hold 15, 20, 25 ambulances. So basically, you come into work, you get your uniform on, you walk to your truck, you check your truck. We have an amazing logistics team at the Region of Waterloo, and they check our trucks. They make sure that they're restocked and everything's good to go for the day. And then we basically go into our roll call room where we talk to our supervisors, talk about things as simple as road closures, things to expect on your daily shift, and then we talk about like the status of the hospitals, how they fared in the past 12 hours. And then we jump into our truck. We book on the air. Dispatch is the is our radio system, and we get on our radio. We call dispatch, let them know that we're ready to go, and then we have a bunch of we call them satellite bases throughout the region, and I think there's 12 now in our region. And basically, you'll get sent to a base, and if you make it to the base, great, you get to hang out for a bit. But there's always that chance that you could get a call and be sent to that call right off the hop. So
Hmm.
that's where it starts to kind of depend on what you're doing throughout the day. But that's kind of how the day starts, and then at the end of the day, it's kind of the reverse of starting. You drive back to your headquarters, you get all your gear out of the ambulance, you punch out and wait for the next shift.
Yep, for sure. And there's a few things that you mentioned there that we're going to touch on later, just so that the viewers know it. We were talking, you mentioned about how the hospitals fared and what level they're in. So we have the black and then the different colors. We'll talk about that later on. Um, Man, I already forget, which is crazy. I was just doing it every. All I know is black. That's all I know.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
But and then you also mentioned about getting a call without going to a base. We're gonna mention that, talk about that a little later on as well. But say one of the viewers here wants to be a paramedic. They don't really know how to become a paramedic. You're in Ontario, so let's say we're in the realm of Ontario. How would one go about becoming a paramedic? Like, what is required? You mentioned a 2 year. Where do they go to find that?
Yeah, so paramedicine's still based out of colleges at this point. There's a couple universities that do bridge programs, but I'll just stick to the colleges for now. So generally, you there's kind of two options. People can either do an undergrad at a university and then go to college and start the paramedic program. Uh, and then the other option would be if you want to go straight to college, you generally have to take a 1 year pre-health course. And then depending on how you do in pre-health, then you may get automatically accepted into the paramedic program, or you may have to do a bit more work, whether it's kind of have a better application or advocate for yourself, why you feel you'd be good for the program. Uh, So those are kind of the two main routes. Like I said, on the university stuff, there are some schools, I believe UOIT is one of them. They have a 4-year program, and basically your first year is a university style. Your second and third year are paramedicine, and you get your paramedic diploma. And then your fourth year is more university style, and then you come out with this hybrid diploma bachelor's.
Interesting.
uh,
Yeah.
and and we're starting to see they because of COVID they put on hold the 3-year program for paramedics. I'm thinking 2024, from what I've heard, is when they're going to start initiating that. But the reason they're doing that is because our scope of practice has grown exponentially in the past couple decades. It used to, like, paramedics as a whole is a very kind of young emergency service compared to fire, compared to police. I mean, fire's been around for probably a couple centuries, right? And
Yeah.
paramedics have really started to take off in probably the 60s or 70s. And now our scope of practice is massive from what it
Hmm.
was. So with that comes a lot of extra schooling, a lot of extra teaching. So even in the 7 years that I've been a paramedic, my scope of practice has exploded. So they're starting to realize that you can't fit that amount into a 2-year diploma. So they're starting to discuss turning this into a 3-year
Okay.
program.
And here, at least in New Zealand, it's actually a 4-year university degree. And I know in other places in Europe as well as a 4-year university degree. Would you like? Would it be realistic to see that in the future of paramedicine? Do you see that in the future in Ontario as well?
Yeah, I absolutely see that coming down the pipe. I think there's enough information there, and the people that are going into paramedic school really understand that there's a massive amount of knowledge that you need to know in order to perform the job to the best of your ability and to keep people safe, to really kind of understand why someone is behaving the way they are, why they're
Hmm.
feeling symptoms the way they are.
Hmm.
Having more knowledge is only going to better your ability to help them. So
Exactly.
I for sure see a 3, 4-year program on the horizon.
Yeah, and you and I both know a few medics out there in the service that are constantly learning, and it's just one of those
Mhm.
professions that's just like, and we have trainings where you guys have trainings every year for base hospital and for the service, and it's a constant education, and you're constantly trying to better yourself because as you said, like more, you can't you know you can't do worse with more information and learning more. There's never too much to learn about how to treat a patient and how to be a better medic. And so continuing on with how does one become a paramedic for you and your colleagues that you see around you, and for people who are graduating college, they have their paramedic degree or diploma now. Sorry, not degree, diploma. What would an ideal candidate look like for you? What is someone that you would really like to work with coming out of school?
Uh, First thing is, I believe that people that are good communicators tend to excel in this profession. When you're in school, they really work on trying to train you for those adrenaline style calls. So those worst case scenarios: a person's having a heart attack and they're trapped in a car and they're also having a stroke.
Yeah.
Like those are the kind of scenarios that you practice in school. And then once you hit the road, you realize that that's probably in the less than 1% of calls you do.
For sure.
So once you kind of get used to running the scenarios in school, and you're able to kind of test how you work under pressure, and how you can manage your own stress so you can properly deal with patients and treat them, you start to realize once you're on the road that a lot of the stuff we deal with is dealing with the elderly and dealing with living conditions in their house, and are they stable in their own home? Are they safe in their own home?
Hmm.
You deal with a lot of mental health in this region, and it's just a lot of it comes down to how a patient is able to cope. So when you show up at a house, you need to determine how sick is this patient, and how are they coping right now.
Hmm.
And if you can check right off that they are sick, then you kind of go into that managing your own stress to deal with the patient. If they're in
Yep.
cardiac arrest, they're sick. So you're
Yeah.
dealing with that. You're going into almost autopilot because school has trained you to be able to think in those like high intensity situations.
Hmm.
Once you realize maybe the patient's not sick or doesn't need to go to the hospital, be at the hospital in the next 5-10 minutes, then you can kind of have that conversation, talk to them. How are they feeling? Why have they been feeling this way? What's been going on in their lives? Like, have they been under more stress lately? Has their diet changed? Those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So from my experience, when I was in school, some of the best students that came out of my program had serving backgrounds that worked in the food industry because their jobs were managing people and learning how to deal with difficult conversations. And as a paramedic, you kind of have to have these. You're performing a customer service, right?
Hmm.
So you need to make sure that you are providing a service that is to a standard that someone can appreciate and feel valued, and they can feel the compassion from the paramedic.
Hmm.
So uh, to be honest, I've had a couple students since I've been a paramedic, and ones that have that serving or bartending background have been excellent. And I mean, you can be the smartest person in the world. You can study books, you can study textbooks, and you can know everything about the heart, everything about the lungs. But if you don't know how to communicate that to the patient, if you don't know how to ask the right questions
Yep.
so they can give you the right answers, it's going to be very difficult for you to determine what's really going on.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. That's extremely helpful. I know for me as a student, I was like, man, I don't know. There's some really, really, really smart people that came out of my class. I'm like, guys, you're blowing me out of the water here. You know, way, way more than I could ever imagine. But, one thing that I was like, okay, at least I know how to talk to people. And I find like that was my strength. I had to tap into that when I was, just obviously I was a brand spanking new paramedic for like a year and a bit, and I was like, I don't know how to come into my own, and really that communication, talking with patients, and being comfortable with patients, even when they're uncomfortable, is really helpful to kind of like again manage your own stress, but also help manage theirs, and I think that's a huge,
Mhm.
huge positive as well. And then if this person becomes a paramedic, what can they expect? Say they work at Waterloo Region. What can one expect being a paramedic? Like, give me some of the best things about being a paramedic.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that I always say about this service is the coworkers that are here are exceptional people. I mean, the people that want to become paramedics generally just want to help people.
Hmm.
And when you find that common ground with people, it allows you to kind of have fun in a distressing environment, right? Like you are going into people's homes on their worst day. So you have to be able to perform and kind of engage with these people. And at the same time, you want to make sure that you're enjoying yourself in the workplace. So there's absolutely hard days that come with being a paramedic. But you have to understand that the job that you're walking into is to help these people that are in crisis. So if you have that expectation that you're going to be hopefully making a difference in someone's life, then there's opportunity to grow from that. And I think with with the coworkers that I deal with today, we all kind of have that same idea,
Hmm.
and I think that goes a long way. And it's when you're trying to take care of your own wellness, you gotta kind of keep that perspective that
Hmm.
regardless of what you're dealing with that day, someone could potentially be having a worse day, and you have to do what you can to try and help those people.
Hmm.
Uh, but in terms of the region itself, uh, I I mean I still love doing this job. I love coming into work. I'm sure we're going to be getting to the healthcare crisis that
Oh yeah.
that's going on in the province. But you
Yeah.
know what? Like going into work and being with my coworkers and trying to make a difference in at least one or two people's lives that day
Hmm.
goes a long way.
Yeah. And I feel like paramedics by nature, if you're trying to get into the job, you're kind of altruistic by nature, and you're caring about others, sometimes even greater than yourself. And even when you have a a terrible call 1 minute, you're right back at it within like an hour, and then you have to completely reset and completely, now I got to focus on this patient and give the best care as possible to this patient as well. And I think that, again, it takes a toll on medics, but you have people around you and that work with you that are always there to support you. And I feel like that was one of those cool things that I really noticed in Waterloo region as well. But talking about just paramedics in general, and as we were talking about, the healthcare crisis, I gave the QP, which is the QP 5191, is the local union there. Perused around the Twitter a little bit. And it was looking like similar to many services around Ontario. It seems to be having multiple instances of code red, low staff retention, and longer offload delay. Here we go talking about the healthcare crisis. So for you as kind of like union exec as well as a road medic, would you be able to kind of give your opinion as to is there a root cause? Is there multiple causes? Um, how, like, obviously it's a whole lot of things, but how really did it come to this? Is there something that you can kind of pinpoint, like we need to solve this in order to give ourselves a little bit of a break?
Yeah, I'll try and not monologue too long here, but yeah. So as you said, code reds is a very real thing in this region, and for those that don't know, there's kind of different names for code red. So it's either level 0, code black, code red, and basically services across Ontario use these terms when there's 0 ambulances available for the community. So anytime we're in code red, that basically means we're a population of around 700,000. And that means that if someone calls 911, they're either getting no ambulance or they're getting an ambulance from Guelph, which is one of our neighboring cities, as far down as Brant County, Perth. These are kind of these services that are directly beside us.
And so,
So that could
sorry,
lead.
if
Yep.
I could just interject there for a second. You said we have roughly a population of 700,000, correct?
Yeah.
So with a
Yeah.
population of roughly 700,000, would you be able to tell us on a day-to-day basis how many ambulances are on the road serving a population of 700,000?
I believe our peak is about 31 ambulances.
Mm-hmm.
And then our low period, because we have different start times all throughout the day, they stagger them. So there's no like mass exodus of paramedics on
Yeah.
shift change. Our low would be, I think, around 10 or 11.
Wow. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
so
Sorry.
the number is
Yeah.
small.
Yeah. Because you mentioned the
And
700,000,
then
like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, and I mean, to put it a little more in perspective, the region of Waterloo, we do about 1,200 calls a week, and about 64. We're projected around 65,000 this year, 65,000 calls.
Wow.
So yeah, so back to the code red
Mm-hmm.
situation. So there's kind of it's kind of a multifaceted issue. A lot of it comes from the chronic understaffing or the chronic underfunding of the healthcare system. That's something that's been going on for a long, long time, long before I was a paramedic. And if you chronically underfund something, it eventually hits a tipping point. And COVID kind of exposed where the flaws in the healthcare system were.
Mm-hmm.
And now that we're slowly making our way out, we're not quite there yet. But we're starting to see like these true holes in the healthcare system. And COVID kind of compounded the issue because it was such a blitz of a crisis that we were dealing with. It burned out a lot of people. A lot of nurses ended up changing careers. People that were about 2, 3 years from retirement just basically pulled the plug and said, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Like, I can easily just step away from this and I can keep myself healthy as well as my family.
Hmm.
So now that we're kind of making our way out, we're seeing the effects of what COVID did paired with this underfunding.
Hmm.
So the offloads we're seeing generally stem from downstaffing in hospitals. There not being enough nurses to monitor beds. Then they end up closing beds in the hospital. Patients are staying in hospital for longer. And the way the bottleneck works in Ontario healthcare is basically you have a lot of ICU patients, but if they fill the space in the ICU, then they move down to the general admitting floor. If that general admitting floor fills up, then they start populating beds in the emerge department. And then when the emerge is filled with these admitted patients, there's only so many beds that are available for paramedics and walk-in patients to fill. And then once those beds are filled, I mean, you're ending up on a paramedic stretcher
Yep.
for, we've seen in the past month, we've seen a 12-hour, a 17-hour, a 22-hour offload delay. I mean, paramedics are starting their shifts
Wow.
at the hospital.
Yeah.
They start, like I said, they start at the south headquarters. They book on the air with dispatch. Dispatch says drive straight to the hospital. And basically, they get to the hospital, and there's a crew that's, for example, working nights, and you're the day crew showing up at the hospital. You give over the patient information, and then you hang out with that patient until a bed becomes available. And
Hmm.
like I said, you could, if you're a 22-hour offload, you spend your entire shift with one patient
Yeah.
on offload delay at the hospital. And that basically just uses our resources that should be servicing the community, the people
Hmm.
that pay taxes to have this service provided to them. We're unavailable for them.
And so obviously we can see how that affects us as the or you guys as a service. I no longer work at Waterloo. But how if a member of the community is just like, well, that's an ambulance issue. It's not a me issue. How does this kind of issue trickle down? No, it's not even a trickle. It's kind of like floods down into the community. How would this issue directly? I know it directly affects the community, but how does it directly affect the community coming from you?
So, like the biggest fear that I have for kind of the future years of the healthcare system, unless something is changed, is there's a chance that we're going to end up in these disaster scenarios where someone is calling for a family member that's in cardiac arrest, and there isn't an ambulance available to come to them.
Hmm.
So because we're seeing these instances of code red increase, the risk to the population is gradually increasing as well, because every minute that there's no ambulance is a minute longer that it could potentially take for someone to get life-saving kind of interventions done to them.
Hmm. So then you were saying that we're underfunded as a healthcare system, and I know that funding directly comes from approval from council, and they base their funding off of how well um, the the service is doing and what the service is saying they need for more funding and more funding. And from what I can tell, is based off of these certain kind of metrics that are being reported to them, saying like, hey, we're responding within a certain number of minutes for code 4, which is for you guys watching, is like lights and sirens. It's the prioritize the most in terms of when they get 911 call. We're getting people out there right now, and they're like, well, we've responded within 2 minutes, 5 minutes. However, would you be able to give us like what are those metrics that they're currently using, and do you think those are the proper metrics that they should be using for just kind of like gauging how well a service is doing?
Yeah, so it kind of almost bang on to what you were saying. So they look at code reds, the amount of minutes we're in code red in given period of time. So say in like a fiscal quarter, how many times we're in code red and how many minutes we're in code red. They also touch on code yellows, and that's when there's 4 ambulances or less in the region. So those numbers are massive. I mean, our region right now, we basically live in code yellow. And that's a combination of our volume and the offload delays that we face because those ambulances are tied up at the hospital. What is kind of a complicated answer is what we do with this information. So there's kind of 2 ways to look at it. You have to understand that if you continuously throw money at a system that's currently in place and the problem isn't solved, are you allocating money to the correct resource, or do you need to systematically change the way your resources are utilized?
Okay.
So that's kind of where we're ending up right now. We're kind of on the horizon of potential change, and we're in the region of Waterloo. We're hoping to see change like this occur. So one of the things we see is that we're going lights and sirens to a lot of calls, and we're going at a very, very high percentage of the calls we go lights and sirens. About 85%. When we're driving to the hospital, we're only driving lights and sirens to the hospital 9-10% of our calls. So it makes you wonder, why are we going to these calls lights and sirens? Is there potentially a better resource that's available to people when they call 911? Because the way that the province of Ontario is right now is, I could pick up the phone right now, call 911 and say, I need an ambulance. Dispatcher says why, and then I just hang up the phone.
Yeah.
And then the dispatcher is obligated to send an ambulance, and we could show up at the house and the person says, I cut my finger cutting an apple, or I stubbed my toe, or I just want to go to the hospital and I have no pains, no complaints. But the way the system is kind of written in our legislature is we're obligated to bring that person to the hospital, and we can't refuse them transport unless they adamantly don't want to go. Then you're going down a kind of refusal situation. But if someone wants to go to the hospital, we are obligated as paramedics to take them to the hospital. No questions asked, really. So this kind of puts into question, do we need to change something in the way we dispatch calls? And with that is, do we need some sort of medical professional on the phones at dispatch answering questions, and then kind of deciding what service do we need to provide for this person? Do we need to help set them up with an appointment with their family doctor? Do we need to instruct them to go to a walk-in clinic? Do they have family members on scene that have the capacity to transport them? Is there some other service? Is a social worker available to go to this person's house? Are they in a mental health crisis and they don't have anything physiologically wrong with them? They just need someone to talk to, and a social worker may be a more appropriate service to be provided to that person. So there's a lot of potential for restructuring, but we need the province of Ontario to get on board with that, because we're run by the Ministry of Health. It makes it complicated because provincial government takes much longer to kind of move along. You can advocate for more ambulances from the municipal side, but if you want true systematic change, you need to get the province involved, and that's kind of what services across Ontario are starting to see.
And so you were talking about governing over these municipal paramedic services is the Ontario government. There were a few questions regarding like what you said changes on the horizon, or you feel like the change might be on the horizon. What kind of solutions have governing bodies come up with so far? Because I've heard a lot of radio shows are starting to pick up on paramedics plights and all the different issues we're having in the region with code red, code yellows, no ambulances available, and obviously with elections and so on and so forth, people are wanting to talk about it. What kind of solutions have people been coming up with on the government level so far?
So we have a new radio system that should be coming into place, and it's going to help with kind of what I talked about in
Hmm.
uh, allocating the appropriate resources or designating what is a lights and sirens call, what doesn't require lights and sirens but still requires an ambulance. So we're kind of moving in that right direction. We probably won't see those changes until the end of 2023, 2024. So it's still a bit of a ways away. As you know, COVID and the supply chain caused a wide array of
Hmm.
issues, but all kind of infrastructure is facing that.
Hmm.
Uh, some of the other things that we've seen is community paramedicine. Can we find ways to keep patients at home for longer, or patients that frequently go to the hospital, to the ER department, and they don't necessarily need to? They just require like a checkup from a healthcare personnel. That's where community paramedicine has some good some good data to support their need. And then we have things like palliative care programs.
Hmm.
So palliative patients that don't necessarily need to go to the hospital because they're palliative. They just are struggling with pain management, or they're struggling with getting comfortable in home, or they're just having a bad day and they just need someone to talk to.
Hmm.
Uh, Paramedics now have different protocols for these types of patients. We can give different types of meds. We can call our base hospital physicians, and we can kind of have a dialogue with them on a treatment plan to keep the patient at home, because at the end of the day they're palliative and they don't necessarily want to go to a hospital where it's not going to change. They're not going to become less palliative, right?
Yeah,
So
for
you
sure.
just you want to make them as comfortable as possible
Hmm.
in the space that they're in.
Hmm.
So those are some of the things that are coming along. I think there's still more that we can kind of tackle. I think long-term care facilities have the potential to provide more care within their own infrastructure.
Yeah.
I hope that things like getting x-ray techs at long-term care facilities, getting blood work, being able to give IV antibiotics, being able to change catheters. Like, I
Hmm.
wish those things were more easily accessible for those long-term care facilities, because a lot of those patients end up being transported to the emerge department, and they are the ones that are kind of a lower CTAS. We have like a triaging system where we basically gauge the level of severity of a patient. And
Yeah.
when they're a low number, or a CTAS 5, that's the lowest. One is like a resus patient. When they're a CTAS 5, they sit on our stretcher because they're a they're an elderly patient. Probably not able to go out to the waiting room by themselves. They could
Hmm.
have dementia. They could have mobility issues. So they stay with paramedics when there could be an opportunity for them to just stay at the long-term care facility and get the care needed there.
Yeah.
So those are kind of just little facets to kind of reduce our call volume. I think at the end of the day, um, putting more resources out into the region is absolutely something that has to happen, and we need staffing to kind of facilitate getting those resources out. You need bodies to put into the ambulances. So
Yeah.
however much funding you get for ambulances, that's all fine and great. But if you don't have enough paramedics,
Yeah.
then you don't have enough. You're basically downstaffed. So
Yeah.
um, I think that aspect is great, and the region's doing a fantastic job in getting the approval for resources.
Hmm.
But we need to find creative ways to reduce our call volume,
Hmm.
because if we're able to do both those things, because we're like here right now, but if we can kind of reduce and increase our resources, we're gonna get to where we need to be faster.
Hmm. And so, just to be mindful of time, I'm just going to skip a few here. But one thing that I found really important that I wanted to talk about is there have been talks with Premier Ford earlier on, and then the talks have kind of like resurged again about privatization of the paramedic services within Ontario. Um, as well as adding supplementary staff to ambulances to help you. As you're saying, you need more bodies in ambulances. They're trying to find a different other than paramedics to put in the ambulances.
Mhm.
And there's one article I was reading where an occupational therapist was like, "Hey, why don't you throw occupational therapists in the ambulances as well? Just because that would help." And I'm not saying it wouldn't help, but there's more than just that involved, and it's kind of a mishmash of different things that need to be addressed before we start throwing people on ambulances. But what do you feel about the possibility of privatization of ambulance services, and is it such a at least I heard that it's a bad thing. Is it really that much of a bad thing in your opinion?
I think it's a frightening thing because I think it opens up the concept of a two-tiered health system,
Okay.
and we've seen the struggles that have happened in Alberta and in Saskatchewan when they had those two-tiered health systems, and then you end up having this population that is getting a lower quality of care because they can't afford that higher quality of care.
Mm-hmm.
And the other kind of question that you put in there was speaking to other kind of healthcare personnel coming onto ambulances. So I think I think that it kind of shows that people don't fully understand the paramedics' capabilities.
Yeah.
So we're kind of a jack of all trades, right? Like just because we show up at someone's house and they've fallen down doesn't mean that we assume that they have some sort of catastrophic injury and need to go to the hospital. So when we see someone that's fallen down, we help them up, we assist them, we check their vitals. If we feel that there's no significant injury, we stand them up, we walk them around the house, we see how they feel walking around, and then we have the conversation of, do you need to go to the hospital?
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of we wear different hats when we work this job, and that's just a huge requirement of the profession. Um, One of the, I think it was the provincial government tried to amend these changes to the Ambulance Act, and they wanted to put RTs and RNs on the helicopters to work with critical care paramedics.
Yeah.
And paramedics saw this as a large problem because it doesn't really create a resolution. The hospitals are dealing with staffing crises. So the concept of just taking a nurse and throwing them in a helicopter, I mean, you're just removing a nurse that could be working at a hospital.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem to make a ton of sense to move those people around. And being an RT and being an RN is a vastly different job than being a paramedic.
Mm-hmm.
When you're an RN, you're in working in an emerge department, for example, you're working in a controlled environment. You have excellent lighting when you're trying to perform tasks. There's a wide array of nurses that are there to help you. And it just makes it kind of a safer space.
Yeah.
Paramedics, you could be in a pitch black environment. You could be pulling someone out of a car. There could be cars flying beside you on the highway, and you have to kind of think of all those things while you're trying to perform the highest level of care
Yeah.
that you're capable of doing. So it's a very different kind of training that's required. So
Yeah.
just saying that someone that has worked in a hospital for 10 years is capable of performing what paramedics do, I think just kind of shows that they don't fully understand what we do.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and it's again, I doubt it's anything against RTs or RNs. Like they're fantastic allied resources. They're capable of so much, and kudos and a lot of respect to them. But it's a different environment, and it's a completely different mindset that you have to be in to be aware of everything that's going around you 360 degrees while also performing delegated medical acts or just whatever you have to do. I remember being in a bunch of different situations where like, wow, this is less than ideal for sure. But I feel like you can't just throw people into the ambulances and say like, hey, you got this, you got high, you can do a lot of medical acts, you're good enough, right?
Mhm.
We're just gonna move on here. Quickly, just more so talking about your experiences as a part of the union and putting on your union exec cap there. So one thing that I read in the Waterloo region, in responses to questions about resources being dedicated, you were talking about resources and the region, being good about throwing or allowing resources to be allocated to paramedics. The Waterloo Regional Councillor Tom Galloway stated council has a master plan for 2022 and that they are, quote, keep adding more and more resources. So my question then is, if council is adding these resources, has it been noticed by you guys on the ground and in the situation ropes keeps finding itself in, being code red, code yellow, so on and so forth?
Yeah, so kind of like I mentioned, they've, to their credit, our chief who just recently retired, he was able to get the approval for more trucks to come on in 2022 and 2023. So that was a big win for us. But the one of the bigger problems that we're dealing with is uh, we're we're not able to hire people at the rate fill to fill all the hours that are required with these new trucks. So
Mm-hmm.
when you create more full-time positions, those full-timers need time off, and that's your vacation time, your stat time, all those days off, like a 9 to 5 person that gets a certain amount of weeks of vacation. Paramedics kind of work the same way, just on an hourly basis. Um, if you don't have part-timers to fill those days off, then you run into this situation where full timers are now working tons of hours. They're not able to get their days off, and that can have a detrimental effect on people's well-being because they're
Yep.
not able to see their families as often. They're not able to decompress because they have to come into work every shift, and every other day is getting denied.
Mm-hmm.
So the burnout slowly increases. It creates that chronic stress that just grows and grows and grows and grows.
Yeah.
And eventually those people kind of think to themselves, is this the job that I'm going to be able to do for 30 years?
Yeah.
Do I need a career change? Is there something that's better for me? Is there something that's better for my family?
Mm-hmm.
So those are questions that we're seeing members ask. And that's why we're seeing some people leave the profession. That's why we're seeing some people go on stress leave. And that's why we're seeing some of these stress leaves being very long periods of time. They can be a year, they can be 2 years, just
Mm-hmm.
because that chronic stress had hit this tipping point. And we thought getting out of COVID, we'd get a kind of a time to decompress, but we just kind of ramp back up into
Yeah.
staffing crisis, understaffing, downstaffing, code reds, all those things just compounding.
Yeah.
So what we're kind of seeing today is, yes, we have the money to get new trucks. Yes, with those trucks comes funding to get full-time employees. Those are all excellent things, and
Mm-hmm.
and we're really happy that we're one of the services that the region has realized that they need a massive influx of cash allocated to emergency services. But what we're not seeing is uh, people staying for long, like reasons why people want to stay for longer. So we're struggling with retention, we're struggling with burnout, and we're trying to figure out ways, kind of creative solutions as to how we can get these people to stay. How can we improve their well-being? What can we do to create change in the workplace so when someone comes to work, they aren't looking at all the negatives of being in code red and
Yeah.
hanging out at the hospital for hours on end. We want people to come into work and be eager to help people, like what I talked about at the beginning of this interview.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure that your employees are excited to come into work and excited to work with their coworkers, because people that are happier are better at their jobs. They're more
Yep.
productive at their jobs. They perform it at a higher level. They're more focused on creating change. There's a multitude of studies that have kind of backed that happier people perform better.
For sure.
So it's finding those kind of solutions over the next couple years to try and improve the workplace. And I mean, this is something that's happening all across Ontario. Like I said, the code reds are all over Ontario, and paramedics as a whole, healthcare as a whole, is struggling. So
Hmm.
we need to figure out how can we support healthcare workers? How can we create change that's gonna not only improve their personal lives but improve their lives in the workplace?
Yeah, and I think I had a question earlier on about how, the current situation has been affecting paramedics. Work-life balance has been a hot topic within, just the workplace in general over the past few years, and it's just seems as though when other workplaces, in office spaces, they're like, oh, you can have this, that, or the other thing to help improve work-life balance, but Waterloo Region and Ontario and in Canada in general is dealing with COVID as well as an opioid epidemic that still hasn't gone away. It's still very
Mhm.
much present. I'm sure you can attest to that. Overdoses are not an uncommon thing, they're extremely common. And so it's two things that are still weighing down on paramedics on a daily basis. And I feel like that's one of those things where, like, man, kudos to you guys for constantly, I don't want to say putting up with it, because again, to a certain extent, that is what we signed up for when we wanted to be paramedics. But on the other hand, like you said, you want to be able to walk into work and be like, man, I can't wait to work with, Nick today. I can't wait to work with, other coworkers. So I could mention so many coworkers who I would love to work with again, and I miss, being back there and working with everyone. But at the end of the day, we have to find those ways, as you said, to retain those paramedics and who are key resources. Even the older paramedics who are saying like 3, 4 years away from retirement might decide to just, pull the plug early, but they are key resources for helping train and just being mentors for the younger paramedics who are just starting out as well.
Mhm.
And just before we finish off, I just want to ask two more questions. One might be a bit longer than the other. I apologize. But recently, in an interview with CTV, you were saying that you were in contact with multiple members of the regional council, and you said that they believe that things were all okay. But over the course of the interview, I think it's pretty obvious that things aren't necessarily okay as some might believe it to be. Just in relation to that, like, where's the disconnect between you as a ground medic and or the service in general and what council believes is happening?
Yeah, I think paramedicine as a whole, like I think paramedics, because we're so young compared to other emergency services, I think one of the things that we had fallen behind on is bringing awareness to what our profession is, what our needs are, and how we can get involved in the government to create change. Because impactful change really starts with talking to the government and moving up through the municipal chain, the provincial chain,
Yeah.
to kind of get your message out there, and finding what your message uh, is is a complicated question, but it's become more easier to figure out, because I mean we're in code red all the time. We
Yeah.
just need people, and we need to figure out ways to create change. Change has to happen, or it
Mm-hmm.
will only get worse.
Mm-hmm.
So we've Dave Bryant, who's the co-vice president for our local, he's been the man behind Twitter, and he's been the one that's been bringing awareness to our code red situations. Him and I have been working together to reach out to council members, and just open those conversations up, start that dialogue, let them know what's going on, because a lot of times it falls on the region, who aren't on the front lines, to kind of throw the data out there and let people know, let the council members know that they're struggling and we need resources. But if frontline workers are showing face to council members, it has the potential to create more impactful change, because they can really hear in our voices
Yeah.
the struggle we're dealing with. They can kind of ask those questions, and we can give these kind of very real raw answers
Mm-hmm.
that they're looking for. And sometimes that's what people need, is they need to really get that emotional response to realize that, hey, maybe it's not all butterflies and sunshine on the
Yeah.
other side. Maybe they actually need our assistance. So
Hmm.
that's one of the big things we've been working on. We've been getting a lot of great media attention. I mean, CTV and The Record, they've been catching wind of us. And our regional MPP has heard us as well, and she's advocated for us at Queen's Park. And
Hmm.
we've already started opening dialogue with her, and she's been an outstanding resource to us, and she's a huge healthcare advocate. And it doesn't just stop as paramedics; it starts with the entire healthcare system that needs this change.
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate you guys for doing that for sure. One of the things that I was, as I, do research and learn more about politics in general is, especially in the US, is talking about lobbying and how important that is in their system about, as you were saying, talking with politicians from the perspective of whatever group is trying to be heard. Is there something like that happening within, like, locally, provincially? Obviously, you and Dave Bryan are doing it, but is there a group of people that are taking the responsibility to talk with those politicians and climb that chain of command, so to speak?
Yeah, so I mean, CUPE is an extremely large union, and all paramedic services in Ontario are part of unions in some aspect. It's not necessarily CUPE. There's a couple other unions that run as well, but we have a kind of overhead uh, company. It's called Keiko, and they kind of oversee the CUPE um, all the CUPE kind of concerns from paramedics as a whole. And they're kind of our best resource for generating kind of media responses and figuring out what message we want to send to our MPPs, to our regional council members, and they're kind of the people that Dave and I reach out to.
Okay, perfect. So there is something going on there, and there's people that are aware of all the various different services and their plights, so to speak. But there's something going on, which is good to hear, and it's good to hear that you and Dave are out there talking with, especially like council members, trying to get give that face to face experience with those people who are trying to hear what's going on the ground. And before we just finish off here, I got the one last question. It's just kind of like to round it all out. And if paramedicine as a profession is to continue on down the road it's currently on without any further intervention, without any changes, where do you see it in the next 5 to 10 years? Is it in a positive light, a negative light? What do you think?
Uh, I I think it would be very challenging to continue on the path that we're on without having change. I think that we just with a growing population, with an aging population, we're going to see an increase in call volume. So we need to find ways to get the citizens of our regions the absolute correct service they need.
Hmm.
Is that a trip to the emerge department? Is getting care in your own home the most appropriate resource? So I think those changes do need to occur, because I think the path that we're on right now is just going to increase call volume, just going to increase offloads. We haven't increased the number of beds, hospital beds in our region in a very long time. They've actually gone down in the past 40, 50 years. Um, so those trends aren't exactly positive, but I do want to say that the paramedics that are coming out of school, the paramedics that are showing up at your door, still want to help. They still want to be a part of what you're going through. They want to provide the best resources as possible. And that's at the end of the day, that's why we're fighting for these changes, because we know that if we are able to help make these changes, then the effect is going to happen to the citizens in this region. And
Hmm.
that's what we're hoping for. We want to provide the most appropriate care the best way possible to make these people as comfortable as possible and to get them where they need to go. in a timely fashion, because time in our profession, time does matter.
For sure.
So we want to be available when we're needed.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to say to anyone else? Anything you'd like to plug, or anything that any message that you would like to get out there before we end things off?
Not really. I mean, if
Yeah.
you want to follow the QP5191 Twitter account,
Hmm.
there's always something going on. There's
There's
about a
always
post
something.
every day these days. So,
Yeah.
uh, yeah,
Awesome.
give it a
Thank you.
follow.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll link that in the description. I'll link that after the fact. This is going to be up on YouTube for later on. I'll post it on Facebook. But yeah, this has been an interview with Nick Desclouds. He's a QP5191 exec, as well as a frontline paramedic over in Waterloo Region. Nick, thank you so much for being here with me today. Thanks for talking, and keep up the good fight, brother.
Yeah, take care.
All
Thanks for
right.
having me
No
on.
worries. Take care, Nick.
Bye.
All right, everybody. That was that. I hope you guys enjoyed. It is definitely a difficult path that Nick's chosen and all the paramedics out there have chosen, but um, they need help, and it's not looking too great right now. But it seems as though they've got a plan in place. They have a structure in place for trying to instigate some change, and I hope that happens sooner than later. And I hope you guys enjoyed. You can find this on YouTube later on when I decide to upload it. Probably unedited again because I'm no major video editor. But thank you guys for tuning in. I really appreciate it. If you guys are interested in being a paramedic, especially in Ontario, do it. It is definitely the best job you can ever find out there, from my humble